Sounds like I hear Guido. I just don't know where he is. There he is. He's back there. Hey, thank you, Guido. That was awesome. Welcome to HIP. I am not Mickey, but I'm playing him on TV for today. I'm really excited to be able to kick this off today and welcome you all. When you think about what we're doing here, it's pretty cool. I'll get way into that. I want to sort of celebrate the fact that we have just an incredible set of content this year. The keynotes here are, sort of really fun and interesting people. Former CISA director Jen Easterly, former National Cyber Director Chris Inglis, and then a really fascinating person you're very lucky is on after me, so I'm between you and a very fascinating talk, which is Dr. Mary Aiken, who is a cyber psychologist, and it's super interesting stuff. We had a great time talking last night. But that's just a couple of the speakers, right? We actually have 40 more speakers that are representing practitioners, people who are actually deploying systems live. We have people who are, we have people from Microsoft talking about the AD roadmap, which I know AD roadmap, some of you are like, what? But but it's super cool to have those folks here to talk. Good friends of mine that I worked with at Microsoft are here to talk about things like ITDR and the plans that Microsoft's doing there. So lots of really interesting content coming today. But wait, there's more. The really cool part is actually on the other side of the stage, right? The people in the room here represent, practitioners, people with deep knowledge. And I will say this several times in this talk, but I would strongly encourage you to get to know each other and look at each other as a massive resource, right? What's happening up on the stage is a very small part of the conference. We've got 250 people, more than 250 people here at the conference. There's more than 1,500 that are joining us online. So this content is available also online for later, but the connections here are, super valuable. We have people representing all kinds of industries and sectors. So whatever it is you do, there's probably somebody here you can commiserate with or collaborate with to do it better. And we have folks, this is sort of a fun one, from almost entirely technical roles, right? And so, again, you want to get down and dirty on what it means to, maintain resilience in an identity environment, you're in the right spot. And you're, amongst good peers. Most of the states represented, few didn't turn up, 4 provinces, we missed a couple, and 11 countries. So it's a great audience here, very diverse, talking about whether it's regulatory issues or, down and dirty technical issues, you've got the right people in the room to collaborate with. Who here is a first-time attendee? First time. Awesome. That's fantastic. Like more than half. That's great. All right. Well, thank you for being here. Really excited to have new folks. Who here is speaking for the first time? Awesome. Super great to have new speakers here. Thank you for contributing. All right. So we've got lots of great new folks. I am not, I'm a returning attendee. So I gave the keynote in 2023 and 2024, both times speaking as the Vice President for Identity Security at Microsoft. And in that role, my team got to build things like the Authenticator and conditional access and did all the MFA for Microsoft, all the risk detection stuff for identity for the consumer side, for the enterprise side. And I spent from 2012 to 2025 building that team up from 2 people to ultimately about 600. And running it. And in 2025, I basically decided that it was time for change, right? And so in January, actually, I decided this much earlier. And so the thing that's interesting about this is Sean getting wrist locked. If you were there last year, it makes more sense. But last year's talk was about like soft style and hard style in the context of identity defense and identity security. Sean and I talked about him getting revenge this year, but we couldn't really figure out the natural way to work it into the talk. So Maybe we'll let him lead me off the stage in a wrist lock or something. Who wants to see that? Sean? Sean's revenge? Okay. So, all right, you can give me the hook later on. Yeah. Anyway, so the thing that I knew in that talk, when I gave that talk, that y'all didn't, was that was my last talk for Microsoft, right? So I knew that's late in the year, and I had actually told my boss I was resigning back in July. So I knew I was coming in kind of, doing this for HIP. And I had no idea that I would be up here this year with Semperis at that point. What happened in January is I told my boss, okay, I'm going to go and do this thing I've wanted to do for a long time, which is I wanted to study Spanish in an immersive environment, right? And for a long time I've been studying Spanish, and I wasn't really getting where I wanted to go. And I knew I needed to do this immersion thing. And I got to where I was like, man, every year I don't do this is another year I don't have that skill, right? So I really wanted to go do this thing. I also wanted to check out and just think about, what did I want to do next, right? So I drove my Jeep from Seattle, Washington, down the coast to Mexico, to La Paz. And this is more or less an average day. This is me fixing something on the roof of my Jeep. An average day in La Paz. And this is my exit mail for my team at Microsoft. And what I said, which was absolutely true, was that I had fantastic leaders that were ready to step up into new roles. And I was ready to try something new, and I wanted to, leave on a high note, basically. I had a great team that was ready for the roles, and it was a safe time to leave to protect the mission. And I thought, well, maybe I'll go, write a book or try a different industry or whatever. So I was going to, go think. And so I was going to spend 3 months in Mexico thinking about what to do and, learning Spanish and diving and playing in the desert, and it did not suck. If you're wondering, was it terrible? It wasn't terrible. It was pretty awesome. But I spent a bunch of time down there thinking about, okay, I've been very fortunate, right? And that I had a really good chapter at Microsoft. And I wanted to figure out, what do I want to do with my next chapter? And so I wanted to think about what really matters. And as I was noodling on the important problems, I'm sitting down there, I'm goofing off, playing with my Jeep, diving, and all this stuff is happening, right? Hospitals are going down, infrastructure is going down, right? And it's getting more and more centered on identity. And you definitely have the sense of well, we did a bunch of good work in the identity security team at Microsoft, but we certainly did not solve the problem in its entirety. And when you look at the things that are happening, these are impactful to everyday people, your day-to-day life, when systems you can't get your surgery because the hospital's gone offline or been ransomwared. You can't get your money because your bank's offline, right? These are very meaningful, down-to-earth problems that we're having. And we're seeing new technologies emerging, which I think there's a legal contract you're not allowed to speak in the technology sector without mentioning AI, right? So but the agentic work, the increasing low-code, no-code, the propagation of applications, all this stuff is not making it easier. And the other aspect of generative AI is, of course, if you've ever heard me talk before, I will rail about how you have to get humans out of the system. But boy, oh boy, is it true now, right? We regularly dealt with things when I was at Microsoft, dealt with things unfortunately, even Microsoft personnel would respond to these random text from a random phone number in a random country. It was hey, send me your password. I'm from IT, I'm trying to help, send me your password, right? That's not an advanced attack. That's the most obvious attack in the world, and people fall for it. And if your employees are falling for that at a 1 in 500 kind of rate, that's enough to get you compromised, right? Because you get that toehold and you move in. And now we have these very targeted, spear phishing that can be done at scale and with automation, and it's just a whole different game. So, this is, I personally will never give a talk where I don't say, get out of passwords. Passkeys are good because they can't be phished, right? So get to phishing resistant auth. But this kind of is nagging at me, right? I'm down there trying to goof off, but I'm we're not done. And Semperis published this information in the ransomware risk report, but we're still seeing a predominance of attacks are involving compromised credentials, compromised identity systems, and then increasingly And even at companies like Microsoft, like so Jen Easterly and I have some history around the CSRB report and the Storm 0558 attack, right, where we actually lost control of a signing key at Microsoft, right? And so this stuff is hard to get right, and it's being targeted, and it's being targeted increasingly by advanced actors. And collaboration is wonderful, right, until, you know, somebody innovates an attack, and then the red team codes it up so they can simulate it, and they check it into GitHub so they can share it, and then some script kiddie picks it up and attacks you with it, right? And so we have the exponentiation of attack sophistication, and the velocity is going up, right? So we see this like increasing surge of these attacks, and it is centered on identity. It's centered on identity infrastructure increasingly, right? Not just, I'm going to hack Guy's account so I can read his mail, but I'm going to get underneath the covers of the identity system so I can read everybody's mail, which we saw, again, repeatedly. And increasingly at Microsoft when I was there, and the stats bear it out that it's happening now. So, all right, so it's important. That's an important thing I could do. I could spend chapter 2 staying on the same basic topic of identity security, and it would be important. But it wouldn't be interesting, right? So I'm just thinking about like what's chapter 2 and what's going to be interesting. So this report comes out. This is from Microsoft, and you can read it. I put the link on there. And it's talking about something we had been seeing really since the SolarWinds attack. The SolarWinds attack is an interesting, like in some sense, a misnomer, because SolarWinds was not actually involved with most of the victims of that attack. There was, at Microsoft, we identified 144 organizations that were impacted. Of the 144, I think 8 were impacted through the SolarWinds vector. So the SolarWinds vector created exposure for many, many thousands of organizations. It was like 18,000 organizations. But the actual method of exposure in most cases was actually simple password spray. The attacker had done an 18-month password spray campaign and gathered the credentials for administrators in like 8,000 organizations. And then they, in a targeted way, used some of them to get into the on-prem environment. And one of the things that's interesting about the SolarWinds attack is that every single victim that we identified was compromised on-prem first, right? So they got the passwords, they logged in, they got into in some cases the network management software. In some cases, they were able to get into domain credentials, add themselves to privileged groups, and get in that way. But this thing that Microsoft published in the Storm 0501 report was actually pointing out that increasingly this is what you do, right? Is you get on-prem, and then you do your recon about how is the on-prem environment set up, and then you tamper with the sync engine, or you tamper with the federation server, or you tamper with the Active Directory, and you use it as a way to leap off and get into Entra. So if you want to read the details, it's here. But this sort of canvas of identity that we build, right? Like who here is not running any on-prem identity software? No on-prem, right? Who here is running no cloud? So that's literally nobody raised their hands for either of those questions. Just if you're sitting in the front and you didn't want to turn your head, nobody raised their hands. So everybody's running both on-prem and cloud, which means everybody's running some kind of sync, everybody's running some kind of federation, right? So these identity systems are not like single post. It's not like I just have Active Directory, I forget about it. Or I have to back up and restore Active Directory and I forget about it. It's a complex environment, right? These environments often have further complexity because of acquisitions, right? So you acquire somebody who's using a different tech, and now you're running, are you running ADFS or Ping? Well, yes. Are you running Okta or Entra? Yes, right? You're running all of it, and you have to get it all to work together, and you have to secure it all. And the attackers love this because you get to any piece of it, and it all starts to connect, right? So this is a super interesting problem, and when we drill into it further, right, we have like thinking about what do you do? Well, in the moments that you're not dealing with an incident or panicking, hopefully you're thinking about how to assess and harden your environment, right? Reducing attack surface area, closing off known threats, like running assessment tools, doing your burn downs, trying to find people who are in your organization that are actually willing to update their applications or retire them, right? One of the last things at Microsoft for me was dealing with the application that had been set up and essentially abandoned by a developer in a test environment that led to a mail breach. And so you're hopefully you're going through all that process, and then things start to happen, right? Attacks start to happen, and so you have to think about, all right, how do I deal with detection and disruption and containment of attacks, and how do I interact with my SOC team, and how do I get information into the SIEM and all that sort of thing, right? When the attacks are happening, and how do I stop those attacks from propagating into really bad things? And then hopefully somewhere in that earlier phases, you've been taking your backups and getting the contact information for your teams and rehearsing and doing your tabletops. But let's get real, many teams have a hard time doing that, both technologically and for time. It's just that things are busy, right? But if you haven't been doing that, the next phase gets really rough, because when things actually go sour and you have an outage or you have a breach or you have an actor in your environment, in your identity environment, then there's the question of what do you do, in terms of actually getting the recovery done or getting the eviction done, right? And when you think about all of those problems, right, this big circle of things that you've got to be doing, if you're serious about identity security and identity resilience, it's all of it, right? And I think we tend to talk about one thing. It's oh, I have good detections. Great, I'm glad you have good detections. It's not that much of the problem, but good, right? Or I have good backups. Okay, it's that much of the problem. Good, right? But when we think about an interesting problem to solve, right, this is a very large canvas. And then it gets better, because if we go into this space and we think, all right, well, wait a minute, what happens in the actual outage? And we kind of built this started from a text thread with the team. And now it's kind of the world's most depressing version of Snakes and Ladders, right? But so we have the game board. And the point is that even if you're now into that third phase of the wheel where you have a recovery going on, it's very simplistic to say, oh, it's recovery time. Let's recover the directory. Let's recover identity, right? Because the first thing is, how do I get my people together? How do I deal with the panic in my executive and investor and board ranks, right? How do I get to my incident response plans, and how do I review those, and how do I get to the place where eventually I can say, I've got enough air cover for my team who are actually talking to each other to be able to select which backup to restore and get a clean room going and get the backup that's restored into the clean room and start to test that thing. And so that little phase is there's choose AD backup, establish clean room at the bottom of the screen, and then there's restore to clean room, right? So it's the dark purple kind of at the bottom right, restore to clean room. So we're oh yeah, okay, so let's look at that step. We're going to restore Active Directory, right, into the clean room. And this is, Microsoft's, I think Sean Dewey helped us get this stuff all parsed out, but this is Microsoft's manual how to recover Active Directory guide. It's 29 steps, fully manual. Mistakes anywhere in it require a restart, right? So that's an interesting problem. That's so when we were talking about this slide deck and talking about this concept, it's really it's fractal. This problem space is fractal, right? There's this high level, all you need to do is prepare, and then prevent, and then respond. It's just super easy. And then you drill in, you're wait a minute, what does respond mean? Oh my God, it's 25. And then what does that step mean? Okay, that's 29 more steps. So in each of these steps, there's this depth. And so the problem is deep and interesting, right? And each of you has expertise. You have war stories and horror stories about different parts of that problem, right? But this is a super interesting space to try to get right. Now, here I'm going to break script a little bit. I want to talk about just not identity recovery, but what it means to not have identity when you're doing recovery, right? So how do you get hold of people? What's the phone number? SolarWinds story, when we were contacting the victims for SolarWinds, one of the problems we had was that the attackers were in the mail systems, right? So we couldn't use Teams or email to communicate to the victims, right? So we're calling them on the phone. Literally, hey, this is Alex. I'm with Microsoft. Your system's infected, right? And click. So this problem is the coordination problem is really serious, right? You don't have a way to communicate with your team. You don't know even how to reach them. You don't know where to find the credentials for the backups that you need. You don't know, what the process is you're supposed to run that you've rehearsed, right? That stuff, unless you've thought about this separately, there's a whole set of issues here that just are, there is, in an outage, if you have a ransomware situation, it's worse. You may not be able to get into the building, right? Like your key card system might be tied into Active Directory and you might be able to not get into your data center. Right, so there's these deep dependencies on the identity system. So how do you do identity recovery without identity, right? So here I'm gonna we debated this. We don't want this to be a vendor thing, so I'm just gonna say there's going to be a track, the customer track, but we are announcing today that we're including in our recovery solutions in ADFR and Duret a solution for this problem. It's called Ready One for Identity Crisis Management, and what it gives you is a mechanism to collaborate, coordinate, and respond when identity systems are down. Fully independent system. We have a bunch of brilliant thespians in the audience who are Semperis aspiring actors. We have the Semperis Actors Guild, and they'll be doing a little live improv at the session, the customer track. So that's in a couple of hours. But this is an important thing, and I would say dig into this more, even if you're not digging into it with this solution. By the way, this is included with our recovery solution. So this is not extra charge. It's just like, we're like, look, you have to have this to do recovery. And if you don't have it, then you don't really have a recovery solution, so let's just give it to people. If you want to learn more about that, there's various ways to learn more about that. Okay, I have spent my 2 minutes. So, I'm down in Mexico. I'm diving, I'm swimming around, I'm like jeeping, I'm having a generally good time. And I'm thinking about what to do with the next chapter, and I've just keep going in this direction of what's interesting, what's important. And it leads me back to identity security is still the most important thing that we can be doing. It is every other system we have at this point is reliant on identity, right? It doesn't matter how you got here, what airline you were on, what credit card you used to get here, whatever it is, if those identities are compromised, it's catastrophic, right? And we see that in deeper ways with infrastructure, hospitals, governments, militaries that are really getting into the game of identity is the thing that we want to attack, and it's the thing that we must defend. And I guess I do want this to be dramatic, right? To defend the fabric of society. If we lose the identity backplane, we lose the ability for people to communicate with integrity, to transact with integrity, to get care with integrity. We've got a serious problem. And so that's really important. And then there's incredibly interesting canvas here. And so it starts to become very clear to me that I think I want to stay in identity security, right? After 3 months of what am I going to do different? All right. So now where do I want to do it? And this is I'm going to channel Mickey for a while. So what happens is, the Mickey equivalent wrist lock. So Sean calls up Mickey and is like, hey, you should talk to Alex. And Mickey and I knew each other from previous HIP conferences. And if Mickey ever calls, you just be warned, I'm pretty sure this was very planned on his part. He calls me up and he's like, hey, I want to talk to you about coming to Paris. I'm like, I'm not doing work stuff right now. I'm just thinking about what I want to do. I'm not interviewing. I'll do all that stuff in April, May. And he's like, okay, that's cool. Then he calls me back. He's like, look, I know you're not interviewing or anything, but I have this problem I'm trying to solve with how do we want to skew these things? And would you just brainstorm with me about it? I'm like, sure. So that was a fun conversation, right? Then he calls me back a week later or 2 weeks later. Hey, I know you're not interviewing right now, but we're having this architecture problem, and I'm trying to think about how we want to layer this tech. Would you mind spending half an hour just chatting with me about it, right? So we chat about it, right? And you can see the pattern, right? So he just kind of has this thing where he's like, I know you're not interviewing, but we're interviewing, right? And so he gets me kind of hooked on the problems that Semperis is trying to solve. And that was interesting and fun. And I was like, okay, yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. And of course, I know folks like Sean and Guido and Gil and lots of folks here that are very, very cool. But I'm not interviewing, right? And then we're talking one day, and I was talking about the mission of my team at Microsoft. And the mission of the team at Microsoft that I ran, the identity security team when I was there, was protect the user. That was it. Right? Now, we ended up making like a lot of money. So it was, it worked out. Like conditional access made some money and, that sort of thing. But the mission was always take care of people, right? Take care of people. And Mickey like clicked into that. He was like, whoa, that's really cool. Because that's what, like at Semperis, we're the same way. In fact, the mission of Semperis is, be a force for good, right? And so then we started talking about this idea that like if we go and we dedicate ourselves to doing the right thing and helping people be secure and helping protect these systems, then the right things should happen, right? And we don't always have to see how that ends. And so I was talking about all the times that like at Microsoft, we had people that were, in some cases, not Microsoft. Like in the SolarWinds case, we called all the other IDP vendors. We called Okta, we called Amazon, we called everybody else. And we're telling them, here are the IOCs. I think that article is still published. Like after I did a certain number of phone calls, I just published it on the web. So here are the indicators of compromise for the SolarWinds attack, right? Here's the queries you look for. Here's the things you look for in the SAML token that tell you it's an attacker token. And we didn't do that because there was like a marketing upside. We did it because we were like, we got to protect the user, right? And he was talking about that Semperis doing the same kinds of things where people would call and say, oh my gosh, we've been ransomwared, not a Semperis customer, but Semperis has some really great people that can respond. And there's sort of that willingness and the dedication of saying like, look, I'm gonna go try to do the right thing first, and then we'll see what happens next. And that's where Mickey and I really connected. Like then that was where I was like, okay, this is the right fit for me. Right? And he and I spent a bunch of time talking about that. So, sometimes it has to bite you in the butt, right? This is a sea lion biting somebody in the butt, which I took that photograph. By the way, sea lions are playful. There was no one was injured in this. They were surprised, but not injured. So that was when I was like, okay, I'm coming back to identity security, and I'm going to do it at Semperis. And a lot of it, again, was because of that dedication to being a force for good and getting to know the people at Semperis who are really focused around that. And like this slide has a bunch of the sort of volunteer things that folks at Semperis do. But actually, I don't think that that's where like I want to be centered in terms of what Semperis does to be a force for good. And I don't think it's just Semperis, right? Because when we talk about being a force for good, like fighting the fight for identity security, doing everything you can at whatever scope you can do it to ensure that the digital systems that we rely on as a society remain secure, that is being a force for good, right? The 250 plus people in the audience from 13 countries and 39 states, right? The 40 people here speaking, the keynote speakers, everybody is a force for good. Right, our partners, the people that helped sponsor the conference, Cohesity and CDW, big thanks to them. Like it's all about that. And so I think that would be my request to you guys as you go through this conference is think about, like, I'm not saying join Semperis, I'm saying join the mission, right? And like think of yourself as a part of that mission. And if we do that, hopefully we can elevate ourselves above like, well, I'm in this company, but you're in that company, or I do this part of the problem, but you do that part of the problem. And start to see the synergies between these things and start to see where we can connect across the line, because this is a critical battle that really does take all of us. And there aren't that many of us that are hardcore technical practitioners that understand the complexity of identity up and down the stack, right? Many of the people that can do that are in this room in a dedicated conference for that problem, for hybrid identity security. You're the target and you're the salvation. So there's an app that will help you guys network and find each other. So I would encourage you to get into that space. That the clock just added 10 minutes, which is kind of strange. I don't have 10 more minutes of content, so we're gonna have a chat. We'll sit, so we can have coffee. Yeah, so I got 15 and 5, so I believe. All right, I'm going with Courtney's number because it aligns more to my timing. somebody added 10 to the clock. I'm like, wait a minute. But so you can download that and it'll help you network. But the main call to action here is, find those channels, right? Like get a chance to get to know each other. And then come party, because that's a good way to, find those channels too. So we have a party at Magazine Street from 6:30 to 10. And there's shuttles coming back, and it's a pretty short walk. So, or stagger. It's probably a slightly longer stagger than it is a walk. I bet if we timed everybody going and coming, we'd find that return times are slightly longer. Just the distance is a little bit longer. So with all that, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a force for good.